Interview with the Finnish president this Friday at 5:30 p.m. in the UK, 7 p.m. Eastern in the US. You can also watch it on Bloomberg, the website, and on the terminal from 9 a.m. London time on Friday. It's the first episode of 6 episodes of season 1 of Leaders with Francine, Lacqua, and myself, where I sit down with the decision makers shaping our future to explore the personal stories behind their public personas. Now, the Finnish leader spoke to me about living in Russia's shadow. And of course, the threat from Moscow has taken a new turn with a Russian drone incursion in Poland. As European defense ministers gathered here in London, discussions will be dominated by the escalating conflicts in Europe and the Middle East. Our Europe executive editor, Chad Thomas, joins us, also to talk trade, France, but also defense. Myron, the former head of international affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and founder of the Brilliant Impact Group. So thank you both for joining us. Chad, this is uncertain. A lot of people will be thinking, like, look, we had this incursion of drones into Poland. Prime Minister Tusk said there were about 3 or 4. There were, I think, the numbers are quite high that they had to stop. Is this an escalation? Was this done on purpose?
It is an escalation, and you have Poland saying that this is an act of aggression. This is the first time that we've seen them shooting down drones that have gone over their airspace. We had, Francine, just about 30 minutes ago, the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, speaking in the Polish parliament. He said that he is going to invoke Article 4, which most of us speak about Article 5. That's where you're asking for military intervention. It's not that, so it's lower than that, but it is a significant escalation. Article 4 is asking NATO members to have consultations to talk about what's happening. Do they need to cooperate more closely on military matters? There is a NATO meeting that was set for today anyway, so they've already said at that meeting that they're already going to be discussing what happened overnight in Poland.
Will we ever really know if it's intentional or accidental? And what's the White House saying on it?
Well, that's going to be the million-dollar question here. We had Kaja Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief, saying that she believed that it was intentional. Obviously, we're waiting to hear what Russia has to say about it, and the White House, they'll be surely waking up any moment, and we'll hearing more from them.
Myron, this comes at a tricky time because Europe is, first of all, not always on the same page right now. You have Donald Trump that's much more friendly to Russia, but then also talked, tougher on tariff threats towards Russia. So how does this change the dynamics?
Well, I think Chad's absolutely right, Francine. I think it escalates things for the president. He's dealing with not only the rising tensions in Europe, but also now in the Middle East coming out of yesterday. He was definitely surprised in Qatar. And he's concerned, obviously, about Putin's aggression. And this is the whole fear to begin with, that the conflict in Ukraine would spill over to the rest of Europe. So while we're not there yet, we're certainly moving towards an escalation of the crisis. So I think the president's got a lot on his hands. Yep. Obviously, the EU and the United States have to deal with NATO security, have to deal with Ukraine, and also trade tensions. And it's a lot on the plate.
Does it put the president closer to Europe? Because there were question marks about, he also rolled the red carpet out in Alaska for Vladimir Putin. If Russia's going behind his back to do this, then is he going to give more support to Ukraine?
Well, Europe is trying to stay close to the president. I mean, look at it post the visit in Alaska with Putin. What happens, right? Zelensky comes to town, and Zelensky doesn't come alone. A lot of EU leaders come with him. What's the message? Europe does not want a gap between what the United States is thinking about in the Middle East or in Europe with respect to these issues. So clearly, the United States and Europe have to work together. Transatlantic ties have to be stronger than ever, but they're being tested, and there is tension, and trade is a part of it. I mean, look at the polling in Europe right now about the U.S.-EU trade deal. It's not very favorable.
No, it's not very favorable, and actually you have quite weak heads of state in Europe, right? So we saw a change of prime minister in France. The situation is still quite unstable because of fiscal issues, and other countries just don't feel as strong as they were in the past.
Well, if you look at what's happening in France right now, they're very inward focused. They're focusing on their domestic issues. They have to. They have huge budgetary problems, and they can't get a budget through the parliament. I don't see how the new prime minister is much more successful than the last two before that. I'm, as you know, based in Berlin normally. In Germany, we have a new government with 3 parties in it. They already are fighting with one another after only a couple of months in power. So is difficult to see how Europe unites around these very difficult topics that they have to deal with.
Yeah, and how can they unite, especially in the threats? Donald Trump asked him yesterday to be much tougher on China.
Well, the one thing I would say to add to Chad's answer here is that certainly Macron's made an effort with the chancellor in Germany. This is the one area, the foreign policy area, is the one area where Macron still has legs, right, to run. He's definitely concerned about the domestic environment. The prime minister will have to deal with the budget, and there's obviously opposition to budget cuts, pension cuts. But in the foreign policy space, I think Macron's been pretty aggressive. The question is, how effective has he been?
Right.
And I would argue his effectiveness in dealing with the president of the United States has been pretty limited as his position's gotten weaker. At the end of the day, Europe and the United States have to stand together. And whether that's dealing with Ukraine and coming to some common alignment on security guarantees, certainly we've seen a lot of talk about defense sovereignty in Europe. That's a direction that's going to have to happen. But the United States can't remove itself from helping support what's needed in Europe at this moment.
Myron, do they have to stand together? If you have a president, even on the tariffs and trades, if you have a president that gives the UK a better deal than the EU as a whole, then is it the New World Order? Does Europe need to, not by choice, but by fact, look for new allies?
Well, I'm no fan of dismantling a global trade system that the United States and Europe put together, right? I've been on record saying that I would not weaponize tariffs, and I certainly wouldn't throw everything into a kitchen and cabinet sink and hope that it comes out on the other side. So I am very concerned about what's happened on the trade front. The EU-U.S. deal is a pretty good deal for both Europe and the United States because it brings some stability and predictability. But it's certainly a big question mark about where we go from here. And there are other issues. How are we going to deal with AI and digital taxation? How are we going to deal with the broader issues of China and manage China, which was your earlier question? If we can't get alignment. Now, Germany will be a big part of that because Germany cares about the auto market. And the United States and Germany and France and other countries are going to have to come together to manage the China dynamic. And we are concerned.
I think part of the challenge for someone like Macron, he can talk tough, but he doesn't have the money, the fiscal space to do very much when it comes to helping with security. The country that I watch closely in this space would be Germany, because they actually can afford to spend if they want to. Merz has said he's going to spend what he needs to on defense. They haven't really put numbers behind that yet, but we'll be watching from our perspective very closely. Where does that money go, and what does that mean for the defense industry in Europe and the European defense as a result of that?
And whether or not Germany is going to buy everything from France in this equation.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's what that would help defense industry, would help Macron's politics. But I think there's a U.S. defense industry. And by the way, who knows? Maybe Donald Trump has a stake in Lockheed one day and other defense companies, and therefore we're going to be doing.
I mean, France and Germany can't reach an agreement on fighter jets, so it's really difficult to see how ultimately people still think in terms of their countries.
Francine, go ahead.
There are just a little bit of headlines actually coming in from the RIA saying that Russia's top diplomat has been summoned to the Polish foreign ministry. Myron, I also wanted to touch on, von der Leyen, the Commission president, gave a big speech today. And if you look at some of the key takeaways, it's very aggressive, where delivered. There needs to be support for Europe's eastern flank against Putin, holding Israel to account, talking about frozen Russian assets, and saying there needs to be a pushback against Donald Trump. On those, what can Europe actually deliver, given where they are economically?
Not much without the United States' support, in my view. Both Europe and the United States have to sanction Russian activity, right? And the United States is moving now to sanction India and China with secondary tariffs. They have less capacity. We've already done a number of sanctions on Russia. What we have to do is just stay united in defending Ukraine's rights, making sure that a land for peace deal is one that Ukraine can accept, and we have to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. That's ultimately what has to happen. The one thing I want to watch, though, that we haven't gotten to is the president's authority over trade and tariffs, because we have a court in the United States. We have a U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Let's see what happens before the Supreme Court. Do they agree with the lower court's decision that the president exceeded his authority over tariffs? If it does, now what happens to the trade deals that the United States has reached? Yeah. And what does that mean for Europe and UK and others? It creates more instability. There's a whole set of questions there, but it might rein in the president's authority.
All right, what does happen? So do they crawl, do country by country, do they show up and say, actually, I want my money back on this and present the Trump administration with a list?
So the president has appealed, the administration has appealed the lower court, the Court of Appeals decision. In November, the Supreme Court will have hearings, and they're expediting. Typically, a Supreme Court case wouldn't show up until June of next year. But there's hundreds of billions of dollars of tariff revenue. There's a big uncertainty. So whether you're the Treasury Secretary or whether you're the White House, you're very worried about the impact of this on the trade agenda for the administration. So I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. It could limit the authority. It could support the lower court's decision. It could have a sort of a hybrid decision. It could say widespread utilization of tariffs is not authorized under IEEPA, or it could say that targeted but not widespread. So there's a lot of options here. We're going to have to see. But to your point, there's a lot of questions about refunds. Right?
Refunds and then fiscal holds, right?
Refunds and fiscal challenges associated with, losing maybe a couple hundred, $400, $500 billion of revenue.
Then how do you fund the beautiful big bill? Myron, thanks so much. Thank you to Myron Brilliant, founder of the Brilliant Impact Group and former head of international, of course, affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and our very own Chad Thomas. Up next, Bloomberg Brief.